when I do this with my middle school kids, it's so interesting. I say hi guys, and they're like talking for another 2 minutes. I'm like, hi guys, but with you guys, it's right away. So this is awesome. I love high school. I love high school. You guys are so mature. So I saw that you guys did a lot of writing when I was roaming around, and that was so exciting because you guys were thinking about what your culture is, what your community and your family means, what you want to demand from your teachers at school, very important, and what's a cause that you care about. So I know some of you guys are shy, but you're not going to get away with it because I want this talk to be about you, not about me, because I'm boring. And you guys are excited, you guys are students, right? So I'm gonna ask these questions and hopefully you guys have some answers. Don't be shy, be brave, all right? Question one was, what in your culture, and culture can be anything, is important to you and why? Oh, a brave hand. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Say our clothes.
Say your name first.
Oh, yes, see.
Uh-huh. And what is important to you?
Clothes.
Clothes, yes. Our clothes represent us, right? Our clothes and our style represent us. So for me, I know I'm dressed in all black and a turtleneck, but this jacket belongs to my grandmother. And I think she has great style. She's 80 years old, and this is her jacket, and I think it's so cool. So our clothes represent our culture. That's great. Any other answers to number one? What in your culture is important to you and why? Don't be shy. Anyone? Yes?
Sports is a big part of our culture.
What sports do you play?
I play soccer.
You play soccer. What's your name?
Julia?
Julia. So Julia plays soccer. Soccer is really important to culture. Awesome. Yes?
I think New Year.
New Year. Then? Right? Yeah. So, do people know what Tet is? Raise your hand if you know what Lunar New Year is. A little bit? Can we describe what Lunar New Year is? For those who raised our hands. What's Lunar New Year?
It does and it's where today we meet and we have we look the money.
Yeah, you get money. Well, if you're under 18, typically you get money in little red envelopes. And it's a big celebration, right? Because it brings in the new year, it brings in new beginnings, and it's a big community celebration. So that's really important. Right, thanks people for sharing. Okay, who in your family, I liked a lot of these answers, who in your family and or community is important to you? And why are they important to you? Yes?
I said my mother,
Why is your mother important?
because she's always looking out for all of us. She's always making sure we're okay.
Yeah. So matriarchs are really important. You guys know the word matriarch? Yeah. The women who run the family, right? Is really, women are very strong. And women take care of a lot of people. So it's really nice to acknowledge that. And I know it's really hard. It's hard for me too when I am 30 years old, but it's really hard for some people to be like mushy and say like, I love you mom, or I love you auntie, or I love you grandma. But even that little bit of acknowledgement, it's really, really nice, right? Shows that you care. So, anyone have another answer? Who in your family or community? So for me, obviously, it's my grandmother, and also my uncle. My uncle's the first one in my family who went to college. And he's only 12 years older than I am, so he went to college and he sort of led the way for me. But no one in my family before had gone to college. So he really taught me what to do, how to apply for financial aid. That was scary. How to look in college, what to say. So my uncle, my grandmother, and of course my parents. But when I walked around, I didn't see people write, your friends. or other students or younger people. And I was hoping you guys would say that, because I know that for me, my friends inspired me, right? My friends are really strong when I'm having a hard day. Like, an activist is not only someone who changes the world and goes up on stage and makes a "I have a dream" speech, although I love Martin Luther King. An activist can be someone who says, oh, you're having a really hard day at school. What's wrong? Can I help you? That can also be an activist, right? Cool. What do you want your teachers and the school to know about you? There are teachers in the room. Speak now. They're here to listen.
Don't be shy, guys.
Don't be shy.
We all see or think somebody raised their hand.
Go ahead.
I have been taking Spanish for 6th grade and I still can't speak it.
So changing how we teach foreign languages, right? How would you change it? How could you envision changing it?
Yeah, I just still don't know how to speak it.
Yeah.
Maybe start integrating it in like elementary schools, and then instead of just like learning words and stuff, you can use in common language and then pick it up
Right.
more natural way.
So, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes, and I know the Spanish teachers and the French teachers work really, really hard. So I definitely acknowledge that. But when you're learning a language, I think for me, when I was learning English, why it was so much easier for me to learn English than for my parents and for my grandparents was A, I had to use it all the time, right? 2, I was a kid. And 3, it was in all settings, right? So it's very hard to use a language for 30 minutes to an hour a day in one classroom, and then not use it in your other classrooms, and then memorize it. For some people it works. For some others it doesn't work. So to get that feedback, it's very important.
Yeah.
Oh.
When I moved to Sweden, I made friends with like Swedish people and people from Germany and stuff.
Mhm.
And I asked if English was hard because I know it's supposedly a really hard language to learn when you're older. And they said it wasn't because they had all started learning in elementary school. So they had been speaking it since they were 5 years old. They said that's the easiest way to learn.
Your brain, I don't know if you guys know, but young kids, they just learn everything really, 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 really fast. When you hit your 20s and you're trying to learn a new language, oh my goodness. I've been trying to re-pick up Spanish now for the last 2 years, and it's just going in one ear and going out the other ear. I can't remember a darn thing. But when you're young, my cousin, who is 7 years old, pretty much knows 3 languages. He knows Khmer, his mother is Khmer. He knows Vietnamese because his father is Vietnamese, and he knows English because he goes to school with American kids. And you know how sometimes your parents, I don't know about your parents, my parents, they always were really afraid of me speaking Vietnamese at home because they were afraid I wouldn't be able to pick up English. No, no. If you speak your language at home and you speak English at school and you grow up to be either bilingual or trilingual, people are going to love that. And that is something that is an asset, right? It's not, it doesn't define who you are, but it's definitely a good skill set to have, for sure, and I think that you should be proud of that. Other causes you want your teachers to know about? Don't be shy. I know Ms. Keeler is looking this way, that way. It's like, what are my kids thinking?
You can also tell me in person if you want.
That's true. That's true. Don't have to call it out here. And most importantly, here it is. What is one cause that is important to you? One cause. For me, my cause is women of color and empowering women of color to know their voices and to stand up, to run for Congress, to be teachers, to be doctors. Because we all know, we live in Maine, and Maine has growing diversity, right? But do we see a lot of teachers of color? Do we see a lot of doctors of color? Do we see a lot of lawyers of color? Not necessarily, right? It's just a numbers game. But you have to also think about the hierarchy right? Where do our parents work? And our parents are smart people, but, you know, I think this is the generation that it changes, right? That we say, we're not just here to look pretty on a poster, but we're here to say, we can do this, give us our resources, and we'll show you what we can do, right? So for me, it's empowering women of color. But I know that I saw a lot of different causes on paper as well, so can we just sort of either shout those out or raise your hands? Yes?
My cause is conserving the environment.
Yeah. Environmental justice, very important. And I saw a few of those over here as well. Yes?
I said equal rights for all.
Equal rights for all. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Like equal rights for like people of different gender, people of different race, people of different religion.
Yeah.
Anything like that. I think everyone should be treated equally.
Yeah. That's really important in this time, right? We all think that we're there already, but there's always progress that needs to be made. For sure. What are some other causes? Don't be shy. Yes.
One of my big causes is to inspire you guys to love science. And if you don't love science, to go out and at least know, like understand the world around you a little bit better than we did before.
That's really important. Science is the future, guys. Science is the now, science is the future. So, Miss Roby, I have a list of books that maybe you can share with the students.
Yeah, I could.
And then I think other than that, unless you guys have questions or comments.
Want to tell one or two things about the books while I send them out?
Oh, sure, yes. Okay. So, I have this silly title that doesn't really mean much, but I'm a psych director at an after-school program in Boston. It's called Tenacity, and I work with 40, 6th through 8th graders. They're a very energetic bunch. And what I am in the midst of doing with them right now is book clubs, and we are trying really hard to read books by authors of color, or about people of color, right? So the 4 books that we're reading right now is Dear Martin, which just came out, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. It's a little problematic right now because the author did some not so great things, allegedly, but the book talks about the Native American experience, and that's really important. Do you guys know who Claudette Colvin is? Does anyone know who Claudette Colvin is? No? So, who knows who Rosa Parks is? Okay. So Claudette Colvin is a 15-year-old girl, or was a 15-year-old girl in 1955, who sat on the bus before Rosa Parks did it, and because she had darker skin, because she was 15 and a teenager, and people thought she had I guess, personality, and because she got pregnant after the fact, people didn't really respect her, but she went through the same thing Rosa Parks did, got dragged off the bus. Apparently, they said that her hair was not as smooth as Rosa Parks' hair, her skin was not as light. So I wanted to expose my kids to another story. It's really important to expose people to stories. So the book I'm reading with them right now is called Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. And the last book is Animal Farm. Who's read Animal Farm? Yeah? Oh. What's Animal Farm even about? Is it about a bunch of animals?
And it's not taking over.
It's about kind of like communism and stuff like that.
Right.
It's like with a bunch of pigs.
Why do you think I'm choosing to read it now with my book club?
Probably, it gives a message about how.
Metaphors, right? Power dynamics. People in power. Or I guess in this case, animals in power. People in power like to hold their power, and we need to change that. We need to change that, not just go along with it, right? So those are the 4 books that I'm reading in my book club, but I also listed a bunch of other books for your teachers to look at. And again, if there's a book that you want to read about, so let's say that you've never read a book by a Vietnamese author, and you want to, or you've never read a book by a Somali author, and you want to, don't just sit there and pout about it. Say something. Okay? All right. I think that's it for me, Ms. Roby.
Oh, so who else, does anybody have
Does
any?
anyone have questions?
Yeah, any questions, guys?
I'm actually curious about what you guys are reading. Like, do you
Oh,
read authors of color in your classes here at South Portland High School?
I have a question. Why is it important to read books by authors of color? Yes.
Obviously, culture in there, stuff that you can learn about, issues within their culture, reasons.
Or just different perspectives, right? Yeah, different perspectives. So you guys will be missing out on a lot of things if you guys are not exposed to sort of the greater world. And I know that I didn't really travel a lot when I was younger, so books was basically how I opened my world, right? And if you read books by limited authors, your world will be limited. If you read books by multiple authors, your world will be full and rich. So that's why.
All right, guys, no other questions? All right, thank you so much. Sherman, can you give your guys?
Is that just about seeing our beautiful faces and putting on posters? What does that really mean? So I am not the greatest public speaker, but I'll try my best, and I also wrote some notes. So if I'm looking down, it's not because I'm ignoring you guys, it's because I'm trying to remember what it is that I wrote, okay? All right. So as I said, I think that for the purpose of Diversity Week, or any initiative that addresses the word diversity, right, it's not about numbers, but rather it's really about stories, and to make sure that people recognize and appreciate the full depth of your story, right? It's not about a display that says, we've made it, and now we're equal, but to say that we're here now, we matter, and the things that matter to us matter as well. So a lot of us, myself included, came to Maine, right? And the purpose of us coming to Maine is, many of our parents would say, to assimilate or to blend in. But as I've grown older, I don't necessarily believe that that's true. You know, we're there and we're trying to find Maine, blend into Maine, but Maine is also here to blend into us, to see what it is that we need, because now we're part of Maine. So I'm here to sort of show my story, and hopefully empower you guys to share your stories as well. And students have a really strong voice. I think in the last 2 months, you guys have really seen student voice be really strong on a variety of issues, particularly the Parkland students have done a really good job of voicing their opinions and demanding what it is that they need. And I think on a smaller level, you guys can do it too. We don't have a lot of teachers of color here, right? We don't have a lot of teachers of color in any place in Maine. We don't have a lot of teachers of color in the US in general. 82% of teachers in American public schools are white women. Now, is 82% of the population white women? No, right? So there is a problem there. And I think that if students stand up and say, we want representation in Congress, we want representation at our schools, we want books about characters that look like us. You guys see how Black Panther did at the movie theaters? That's because people were saying, okay, you know, now we're being represented. Our dollars count, our voices count. So that's what I'm here to try to empower you guys to build up, okay? But before anyone does that, I want to start by telling a little bit about myself and my story. Some of you guys already know my story, so blah, right? But for those of you guys who don't know my story, I think it's important to model what it's like to share your own stories, so that you guys can also do that, not from a deficit point of view, not from a point of view that says, oh my God, I'm a person of color, let me tell you about all the bad things that has happened to me so I can display my pain and my suffering in front of everyone and have them sort of just take it in. That's not the purpose of that at all. The purpose of telling your stories is to take charge of it and to sort of create the full depth of your story and what's important to you, and you should be the author of that, not anyone else, okay? So My story is obviously didn't begin with me, and none of our stories do, right? It began with French colonization of Vietnam, and with China also trying to take control of Vietnam. Lots of countries had a stake during the war, including the United States, which is why my grandfather, an African-American soldier, ended up going to fight in Vietnam, right? So during the time, it was the 1960s, and he didn't necessarily have equal rights in the US either, because that was the time of MLK, it was the time of the Civil Rights Movement, but there he was, and thousands of black soldiers just like him on the front lines of the war, right? And that's where he met my grandmother in the 1960s, and together they had my father in 1967, and he was able to be there in my father's life for 3 or 4 years. But then he got deployed back to the United States, and they lost touch. And then, of course, what happened in 1975, does anyone know? Any history buffs in the room? No? So in 1975, the war ended, right? And the war ended, and did the US side, European side, win or lose the war? They lost, that's right. So they lost the war. And because they lost the war, the US put sanctions on Vietnam. And sanctions are basically like restrictions, right? So people in Vietnam, so the relations between the two countries were basically depleted, gone, there was no relations. And Vietnam was trying to, I guess, come back together as a country, which means that if you're a person like my father and you're a person like my grandmother who has an Amerasian child. Amerasian means a child that has an American father and an Asian mother, that you were sort of seen as a traitor in your country. And so what happened in the 1970s was my grandmother burned all the images of my father and his father, and so did a lot of Amerasian families. They didn't want sort of that relationship. And my father was really lucky because his mother kept him and loved him, but for a lot of Amerasian people, their families abandoned them. They were in orphanages, and they were sort of just let to be on their own because they were sort of the face of a face of defeat and a face of traitors, and they didn't want to be part of the country. They didn't want them to be part of the country anymore. So in the 1980s, Vietnam was in this state of disarray, even worse than the war, right? American sanctions were put in place, so we didn't have any resources from the US. So we didn't have resources. Agent Orange had killed a lot of the fields and the crops, and people were in really dire poverty. And so the US sent over a news crew. It was either from CBS or ABC or NBC, one of those networks. You guys can double check. I don't really remember. But one of the news crews went over to the US, or to Vietnam, and they were trying to study the effects of Agent Orange, which is this chemical that was sprayed onto the fields that killed all the plants, but it also created birth defects for a lot of the children. So millions of children had birth defects. So that's what they went over to study. What they found in addition, or I guess instead, was that hundreds of thousands of children looked American. They looked white. They looked Latino. They looked black. But they didn't have any family. They were abandoned in the streets. They weren't able to go to school. My father was really lucky. He got to go to school in the 8th grade, until the 8th grade, but he was the exception, not the rule, right? So all of these children were abandoned, and they came back to the Reagan administration, which was, President Reagan was in power at that time, and they said and they basically shamed him. They're like, look, thousands of children who are American, have American fathers, are here, and they're abandoned, and this is shameful. And so together his administration crafted the Amerasian Homecoming Act in 1987, which basically says that if you can prove that your family or your father was American, you can come to the US. Which, ta-da, that's why I'm here. which is why my family got to come here in 1990. 1988, my mom and my dad had me, so in 1990 we were able to come here. It's relatively easy to tell that my father was his father's child because Vietnamese people don't normally look black, and my father did, and it was really easy to prove. And so we were able to come here to an AmeriAsian hub in Portland. There's about 50 throughout, or at that time about 50 hubs throughout the country, basically putting us in places that were super white because immigrants who had come before in the 1970s and 1960s were taking up places like California, like New York, and so they were depleting those resources per se, and so they put us in Maine, the whitest place in the world. And you know, there we were, and we didn't really have sort of a community here. Maine wasn't really used to us, but we sort of bonded with the dozen or so other families that kept coming, and we had each other, right? So knowing that history, and my family always made sure that I knew my history. I had a desire to really uplift my roots and to be part of the story here, right? I wasn't just someone who came to Maine and now had to assimilate to Maine and to do everything Mainers did, although I kind of felt like I had to do that when I was in LISA and was one of 3 students of color. When I was in South Portland, teaching here was one of the few adults of color. Of course you feel that, you feel as a child that you want to eat hot dogs and macaroni and cheese, but your family brings you the lunch of rice and pork. And you're like, darn, right? Or you want to lose your accent when you're younger because, you know, you want to speak like the American kids do. But for me, now that I'm grown up, and now that I'm 30, I'm like, accents are so cool. They represent your roots, they represent your family, they represent where you're from. But I think as a kid, that's really hard. And you guys are in high school, you know how hard high school can be. But I think that because my family kept telling my story, and I grew up in a community of color, particularly with really strong women of color, I've always advocated for that. And I've always advocated to learn about my history, right? So that's a little bit of my story. And I share that story with you because if it wasn't for sort of the high school and the middle school teachers who said, you need to take charge of your story, you need to demand what it is that you want to learn about, to get those resources, to learn about the things you want to learn about, you need to speak up, then I would not sort of be in the position that I'm here right now. I'm not saying I'm in a cool position or whatnot, but I know that in high school there were lots of students who were smarter than me, more articulate than me, obviously, funnier than me. But when I was in Darien High School and graduated in 2007, there were lots of Khmer and Vietnamese students who weren't graduating. And they weren't graduating because they hadn't befriended, I guess, a teacher who said, who asked them, where can I get SAT resources? Where can I go to get tutoring? Where can I go to get XYZ? Where can I go to get this book or that book, right? How do I demand my library get something that I want to study? So that would be sort of the advice that I give you guys. If it's something that you want to study, if it's something that you want to know about, if you're struggling and you think that you can almost take an AP class, but you're not quite there yet, lots of students are not quite there yet. AP classes are hard. Honors classes are hard, right? But students get there because they get the support and the tutoring of their teachers, and because they've been, a lot of students, starting from a very young age, told that they're smart, they're able, they're capable, and that's sort of what my mission is, right? For young people of color, particularly for young women of color, to always feel smart, empowered, able, and to just demand the same resources that everyone else has a part of. What I sort of want to leave you guys with is, if you're 30% of the South Portland High School population, you should demand to get 30% of the resources, at least, right? If you want to study something, guess what? It's not South Portland High School's education, it's your education, right? So if you want to do something, don't wait until you're an adult. Because adults are adults, they're old. They've been through stuff, they feel deflated, but you guys have energy, so you guys can do it. So yeah, that's sort of enough about me. I want to pause. I know I talk fast and I mumble sometimes to see if you guys had any questions, and then we'll transition into something different.
Anybody have any questions so far?
Don't be shy, guys. And you guys can ask questions throughout the duration of this whole thing as well, okay? No? Okay. So, yeah. Let me explain it first. Okay. So, do you guys ever watch movies or TV shows and there's a story about a person of color or an immigrant person and it's like really, really sad? Have you guys seen those movies and stories? Yeah. They're all really, really sad, right? And they come from, oh my goodness, I came from a war, or my family was really, really poor and we didn't have clothes and la 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 la, right? I want you guys to think about how to shift that narrative, right? How to think about making your stories about the things that are important to you, right? Not the things that make people cry, but the things that are important to you. I want you, when Ms. Roby passes this paper around, to think about your culture. White people have culture, black people have culture, Asian people have culture. What's important for you in your culture? Who in your family do you look up to, or in your community? What do you want your teachers at school to know about you? And maybe what do you demand of them? And what's one cause that's really important to you? Okay? So look at that for a second, and then after about 5 minutes, you can turn and talk with a friend next to you.